So let's now take a look at the rational function 1 over x squared. And just like when we looked at the function 1 over x, we want to make a table to see if we can figure out what the curve looks like. So if you're ever unsure of what a graph looks like, just start by making a table, picking different x values and plugging them in to see what happens. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3. And we can look at some negative numbers like -1, -2, -3. And just like the previous rational function, we are going to need to look at some fractional values as well. So we can look at 1/2, 1/3. We can look at -1/2 and -1/3. And we can fill in different x values if we need to. Now, starting with 0, we would have 1 divided by 0 squared. So again, we're going to end up with 1 divided by 0 here, which we know is undefined. So we cannot plug in x equals 0. We're going to end up with what we call an asymptote, a boundary layer here that the function cannot pass through. But we can plug in everything else. This is the only value of x that is not in the domain of this function. So let's plug in 1. We get 1 over 1 squared, which is just 1. We plug in 2. We get 1 over 2 squared. 2 squared is 4, so we get 1/4 here. And plugging in 3, we get 1 over 3 squared, or 1 over 9. Now when we plug in the negatives, we have 1 over -1 squared. And remember, when you are squaring a negative, you multiply this negative number twice, which will make it a positive number, since a negative times a negative is a positive. So this will just be 1 over 1, which is simply 1. When we plug in -2, we get 1 over -2 squared, and -2 squared is 4. It will again be a positive number, and plugging in -3, the square makes it positive, and we get 1/9. Now let's put in some fractions. So we have 1 over 1/2 squared, or I can say 0.5 just for the sake of room. And 0.5 squared would be 0.25, or 1/2 squared would be 1/4. So this is really just 1 over 1/4. And we could ask ourselves, how many fourths are there in 1? And there are 4. Or you can think of it that you're dividing by a fraction, so that's the same as multiplying by this bottom fraction flipped over. So 1 times 4 over 1, which again is just 4. If we plug in 1/3 and square that, we'll get 1 over 1/9, and we're dividing by 1/9, and that goes into 1 9 times. And when we plug in -1/2, what will happen is that the negative will multiply by itself and become a positive number. So this will be the exact same value as when we put in 1/2. Since we get 1 over 1/4, which is just 4. And -1/3 and 1/3 will also have the same y value. So this will also be 9. So let's plug in some points and see if we can determine a pattern here. Goes through at 1, 1, but also at -1, 1. And we know it goes through at 2, 1/4, at 3, and 1/9. And if we put in 4, 4 squared is 16, so that'd be 1 over 16. So it'd be very close to the x-axis. And on the negative side, it's actually a mirror image. When we plug in -2 here, we'd get positive 1/4. -3 gives us 1/9. And -4 would give us 1/16. So we get the same picture on both sides. It's symmetric about the y-axis so far. And if we plug in 1/2, we just get 4. And -1/2 also gives us 4. If we plug in 1/3, that will give us 9, which is way up here, but it's going to be closer to the y-axis. And likewise, it'd be the same on the left-hand side. So we can generalize this curve since it seems like as we're getting closer and closer to 0 from either side, it shoots up to bigger and bigger y values. In fact, as we approach 0 from either side, the y value starts to approach infinity, again from both directions. So let's just fill in this curve. So this orange curve here is the graph of g of x. or this function 1 over x squared. And if you want to prove to yourself that the function does go off to infinity as you get closer and closer to 0, you can just plug in smaller and smaller fractions. For instance, let me stick with that blue color. If we plug in 1/10, it would be 1 over 1/10, which is 1 over 100. And 1 divided by 1/100th is 100. And the smaller the fraction you put in, the bigger the y value. And likewise, when you plug in negative x values, that will just square and become a positive value and will give you the exact same y value. So this would be positive 100 even if this is minus 1/10.